Hello and welcome back to Juniper GraceTube number 19. We're almost at 20 episodes. Holy, how did that happen? I don't even know. I'm so excited. That is amazing. Well, I'm so glad that you are here, my darling Junipers, to either... Oh, my hair's doing something funny. I'll leave it. Anyways, to either be brand new, welcome here, or returning. I am just bless you for coming back. I'm so glad you're back. I just wanted to say hello. I want to say that I am Juniper Grace, your lovely host. This is Juniper GraceTube. You can find me as Juniper Grace on Ravelry. You can find me on Instagram as Juniper Grace. You can find the group for this podcast as Juniper GraceTube on Ravelry, and on Twitter I am GRaceFace, Gee Raceface. My hair is driving me crazy. I don't know why. I'll just leave it down. I don't know why I had GRaceFace. I think it was an old nickname that I had, and well, it's been around for a long time. I've been with Twitter for just over 7 years now. But Twitter is linked to my Instagram, is linked to, yeah. So, anyways, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming. We are going to dive into chapter 5 and 6 of Anne of Green Gables because it's driving me crazy. I want to find out if she is going to stay or not. It's a really good joke. This is officially a part of the hashtag Anne along with Annie Light Knits of Little Skein in the Big Wool. Her amazing Anne of Green Gables kit is on sale for pre-order, I believe, or the various elements of her incredible kit on her Etsy shop, which is littleskeininthebigwool.etsy.com. And I will tell you way more about that when my kit actually arrives and I get to show you everything because I'm so excited. If you couldn't tell. For the next little while, she's actually hosting an Anne Along, which is basically knit something, do something that makes you think of Anne of Green Gables. And if you do hashtag your pictures on Instagram with Anne Along, so A-N-N-E, Anne with an E, along, and there's prizes and all kinds of fun things. And this counts as an Anne Along, so you could take a picture of me going like this. Okay, I posed for a little while for you to do the picture. If you have to, just go back and pause. I'll go one more time. I don't know, I was squinting one eye. It's like, arr, my Analog pirate face. And just hashtag Analog. Okay, alright, so let's dive in because this is going to be a little bit long. I did the math and I figured out between the two chapters, it's the same length as one sort of longer chapter because the chapter 6 is short. So this is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. I think it was written, 1905? Copyright's 1908. I think she started it in 1905. But it's just a beautiful piece of Canadian literature and heritage because I don't even know one Canadian girl that hasn't grown up and wanted to be Anne. I wanted to be Anne. So let's dive in. Last time we left it where Marilla and Anne were driving down the lane to White Sands to figure out what happened, where the mistake was made, and we still don't know if she gets to stay at Green Gables. Okay, so chapter 5, Anne's history. Do you know, said Anne confidentially, I've made up my mind to enjoy this drive. It's been my experience that you can nearly always enjoy things if you make up your mind firmly that you will. Of course, you must make it up firmly. I am not going to think about going back to the asylum while we're having our drive. I'm just going to think about the drive. Oh, look, there's one little early wild rose out. Isn't it lovely? Don't you think it must be glad to be a rose? Wouldn't it be nice if roses could talk? I'm sure they could tell us such lovely things. And isn't pink the most bewitching color in the world? I love it, but I can't wear it. Red-headed people can't wear pink. which I don't think is true, but anyways. Not even in imagination. Did you ever know of anybody whose hair was red when she was young but got to be another color when she grew up? No, I don't know as I ever did, said Marilla mercilessly, and I shouldn't think it likely to happen in your case either. Anne sighed. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Oh, this always happens. Do you have your delicious beverage? I have some coffee in my black dog mug from Martha's Vineyard. Grab your coffee, grab your knitting, and we'll get back to this. And remember, if you can't watch it all in one go, don't feel bad. You can definitely pause, pick up, skip ahead, whatever you want. It doesn't hurt my feelings because, well, I don't know what's happening. Okay, so anyways, Anne sighed. Well, that is another hope gone. My life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes. That's a sentence I read in a book once, and I say it over to comfort myself whenever I'm disappointed in anything. I don't see where the comforting comes in myself, said Marilla. Why, because it sounds so nice and romantic, just as if I were a heroine in a book, you know. I am so fond of romantic things, and a graveyard full of buried hopes is about as romantic a thing as one can imagine, isn't it? I'm rather glad I have one. Are we going across the Lake of Shining Waters today? We're not going over Barry's Pond, if that's what you mean by your Lake of Shining Waters. We're going by the Shore Road. Shore Road sounds nice, said Anne dreamily. Is it as nice as it sounds? Just when you said Shore Road, I saw it in a picture in my mind, as quick as that, and White Sands is a pretty name too, but I don't like it as well as Avonlea. Avonlea is a lovely name. It just sounds like music. How far is it to White Sands? It's 5 miles, and as you're evidently bent on talking, you might as well talk to some purpose by telling me what you know about yourself. Oh, what I know about myself isn't really worth telling, said Anne eagerly. If you'll only let me tell you what I imagine about myself, you'll think it ever much more interesting. No, I don't want any of your imaginings. Just you stick to bald facts. Begin at the beginning. Where were you born, and how old are you? I was 11 last March, said Anne, resigning herself to bald facts with a little sigh, and I was born in Bolingbroke, Nova Scotia. My father's name was Walter Shirley, and he was a teacher in the Bolingbroke High School. My mother's name was Bertha Shirley. Aren't Walter and Bertha lovely names? I'm so glad my parents had nice names. It would be a real disgrace to have a father named, well, say Jedediah, wouldn't it? I guess it doesn't matter what a person's name is as long as he behaves himself, said Marilla, feeling herself called upon to inculcate a good and useful moral. Well, I don't know, Anne looked thoughtfully. I read in a book once that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, but I've never been able to believe it. I don't believe a rose would be as nice if it was called a thistle or a skunk cabbage. I suppose my father could have been a good man, even if he had been called Jedediah, but I'm sure it would have been a cross. Well, my mother was a teacher in the high school, too, but when she married father, she gave up teaching, of course. A husband was enough responsibility. Mrs. Thomas said that they were a pair of babies and as poor as church mice. They went to live in a weeny-teeny little yellow house in Bolingbroke. I've never seen that house, but I've imagined it thousands of times. I think it must have had honeysuckle over the parlor window and lilacs in the front yards and lilies of the valley just inside the gate, yes, and muslin curtains in all the windows. Muslin curtains give a house such an air. I was born in that house. Mrs. Thomas said I was the homeliest baby she ever saw. I was so scrawny and tiny and nothing but eyes, but that mother thought I was perfectly beautiful. I should think a mother would be a better judge than a poor woman who came in to scrub, wouldn't you? I'm glad she was satisfied with me anyhow. I would feel so sad if I thought I was a disappointment to her, because she didn't live very long after that, you see. Ava, do you want out? Oh, okay, sorry, I have to go let my kitty out. I will be right back, sorry. Okay, little one. Here you go, go on. Oh, those birds, lots of birds. Oh, I know why my kitty wants out. Wants to go catch the birds. Please don't catch the birds. Okay, sorry. Just had to go let the kitty out, or she would sit there and meow and meow and meow, and that would be the podcast. It'd be Ava Kitty meowing. Don't want that. Now, where was I? Dun 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 dun. Okay. I'm so glad she was satisfied with me anyhow. I would feel so sad if I thought I was a disappointment to her, because she didn't live very long after that, you see. She died of fever when I was just 3 months old. I do wish she'd lived long enough for me to remember calling her mother. I think it would be so sweet to say mother, don't you? And father died 4 days afterward from fever, too. That left me an orphan, and folks were at their wits' end. So Mrs. Thomas said what to do with me. You see, nobody wanted me even then. It seems to be my fate. Father and mother had both come from places far away, and it was well known they hadn't any relatives living. Finally, Mrs. Thomas said she'd take me, though she was poor and had a drunken husband. She brought me up by hand. Do you know if there's anything in being brought up by hand that ought to make people who are brought up that way better than other people? Because whenever I was naughty, Mrs. Thomas would ask me how I could be such a bad girl when she had brought me up by hand, reproachful like. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas moved away from Bolingbroke to Marysville, and I lived with them until I was 8 years old. I helped look after the Thomas children. There were 4 of them younger than me, and I can tell you they took a lot of looking after. Then Mr. Thomas was killed falling under a train, and his mother offered to take Mrs. Thomas and the children, but she didn't want me. Mrs. Thomas was at her wits' end, so she said what to do with me. Then Mrs. Hammond from up the river came down and said she'd take me, seeing as I was handy with children, and I went up the river to live with her in a little clearing among the stumps. It was a very lonesome place. I'm sure I could never have lived there if I hadn't any imagination. Mr. Hammond worked a little sawmill up there, and Mrs. Hammond had 8 children. She had twins 3 times. I like babies in moderation, but twins 3 times in succession is too much. I told Mrs. Hammond so firmly when the last pair came, I used to get so dreadfully tired carrying them about. I lived upriver with Mrs. Hammond over 2 years, and then Mr. Hammond died, and Mrs. Hammond broke up housekeeping. She divided her children among her relatives and went to the States. I had to go to the asylum at Hopeton because nobody would take me. They didn't want me at the asylum either. They said they were overcrowded as it was, but they had to take me, and I was there for 4 months until Mrs. Spencer came. Anne finished up with another sigh of relief this time. Evidently, she did not like talking about her experiences in a world that had not wanted her. Can you believe that? So sad. Did you ever go to school? Demanded Marilla, turning the sorrel mare down the shore road. Not a great deal. I went a little the last year I stayed with Mrs. Thomas. When I went up river, we were so far from a school that I couldn't walk it in winter, and there was vacation in summer, so I could only go in the spring and the fall. But of course I went while I was at the asylum. I can read pretty well, and I know ever so many pieces of poetry off by heart. The Battle of Hohenlinden, and Edinburgh after Flodden, and Bingen on the Rhine. And lots of Lady of the Lake, and most of the Seasons by James Thompson. Don't you just love poetry that gives you a crinkly feeling up and down your back? There is a place in the Fifth Reader, The Downfall of Poland. A piece in the Fifth Reader that is just full of thrills. Of course, I wasn't in the Fifth Reader. I was only in the Fourth, but the big girls used to lend me theirs to read. Could you imagine? Were those women, Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Hammond, good to you? Asked Marilla, looking at Anne out of the corner of her eye. Oh, faltered Anne. Her sensitive little face suddenly flushed scarlet, and embarrassment sat on her brow. Oh, well, they meant to be. I know they meant to be, just as good and as kind as possible. And when people mean to be good to you, you don't mind very much when they're not quite, always. They had a good deal to worry them, you know. It's very trying to have a drunken husband, you see, and it must be very trying to have twins 3 times in succession, don't you think? But I feel sure they meant to be good to me. Marilla asked no more questions. Anne gave herself up to a silent rapture over the shore road, and Marilla guided the sorrel abstractedly while she pondered deeply. Pity was suddenly stirring in her heart for the child. What a starved, unloved life she had had, a life of drudgery and poverty and neglect. For Marilla was shrewd enough to read between the lines of Anne's history and divine the truth. No wonder she had been so delighted at the prospect of a real home. It was a pity she had to be sent back. What if she, Marilla, should indulge Matthew's unaccountable whim and let her stay? Ooh, I just got shivers. He was set on it, and the child seemed a nice, teachable little thing. She's got too much to say, thought Marilla, but she might be trained out of that, and there's nothing rude or slangy in what she does say. She's ladylike. It's likely her people were nice folks. The shore road was woodsy and wild and lonesome. On the right hand, scrub firs, their spirits quite unbroken by long years of tussle with the Gulf winds, grew thickly. On the left were the steep red sandstone cliffs, so near the track in places that a mare of less steadiness than the sorrel might have tried the nerves of people behind her. Down at the base of the cliffs were heaps of surf-worn rocks or little sandy coves, inlaid with pebbles as with ocean jewels. Beyond lay the sea, shimmering and blue, and over it soared the gulls, their pinions flashing silvery in the sunlight. "Isn't the sea wonderful?" said Anne, rousing from a long, wide-eyed silence. "Once, when I lived in Marysville, Mr. Thomas hired an express wagon and took us all to spend the day at the shore, 10 miles away. I enjoyed every moment of that day, even if I had to look after the children all the time. I lived it over in happy memories for years. But this shore is nicer than the Marysville shore. Aren't those gulls splendid? Would you like to be a gull? I think I would. That is, if I couldn't be a human girl. Don't you think it would be nice to wake up at sunrise and swoop down over the water and away out over the lovely blue all day, and then at night to fly back to one's nest? Oh, I can just imagine myself doing it. What a big house is that just ahead? What big house is that just ahead, please? That's the White Sands Hotel. Mr. Kirk runs it, but the season hasn't begun yet. There are heaps of Americans come there for the summer. They think this shore is just about right." "I was afraid it might be Mrs. Spencer's place," said Anne mournfully. "I don't want to get there. Somehow it will seem like the end of everything." It's the end of chapter 5. Now, since we're in such agony, we absolutely have to read chapter 6, because chapter 6 is where Marilla makes up her mind. So take a pause and have a sip of coffee. Pinky out. Very ladylike. I love Anne, and you know what? When I was on Martha's Vineyard, I couldn't help but think of Anne of Green Gables and PEI, because Martha's Vineyard is over on the East Coast, and as you see, I'm from the West Coast here, Victoria on Vancouver Island. As similar as they are, it's still very different out on the East Coast. There's a different feel by the ocean, by the Atlantic instead of the Pacific. And somehow, even though it was Martha's Vineyard, so it's further south than where Anne is, it just felt like I was close to her. And actually, a lot of people thought when I said I was from an island or from Canada, a lot of people thought I was from Nova Scotia, but I wasn't. But it got so rooted in my mind that I accidentally was like Nova Scotia one time when I meant to say Vancouver Island. But my dad is from Nova Scotia, so I do have ties, and I used to have an uncle that lived in PEI, and we went to visit once when I was 4. I wish I remember more of it, but there's pictures. Anyways, chapter 6. Marilla makes up her mind. Get there they did, however, in due season. Mrs. Spencer lived in a big yellow house at White Sands Cove, and she came to the door with surprise and welcome mingled on her benevolent face. "Dear, dear," she exclaimed, "you're the last folks I was looking for today, but I'm real glad to see you. You'll put your horse in. And how are you, Anne?" "I'm as well as can be expected, thank you," said Anne, smilelessly. A blight seemed to have descended on her. "I suppose we'll stay a little while to rest the mare," said Marilla, "but I promised Matthew I'd be home early. The fact is, Mrs. Spencer, there's been a queer mistake somewhere, and I've come over to see where it is. We sent word, Matthew and I, for you to bring us a boy from the asylum. We told your brother, Robert, to tell you we wanted a boy 10 or 11 years old. Marilla Cuthbert, you don't say so, said Mrs. Spencer in distress. Why, Robert sent word down by his daughter Nancy, and she said you wanted a girl, didn't she, Flora Jane? Appealing to her daughter, who had come out to the steps. This is why you just ask directly. Just an idea. She certainly did, Mrs. Cuthbert, corroborated Flora Jane earnestly. I'm dreadfully sorry, said Mrs. Spencer. It is too bad, but it certainly wasn't my fault. You see, Miss Cuthbert, I did the best I could, and I thought I was following your instructions. Nancy is a terrible flighty thing. I've often had to scold her well for her heedlessness. It was our own fault, said Marilla resignedly. We should have come to you ourselves and not left an important message to be passed along by word of mouth in that fashion. Anyhow, the mistake has been made, and the only thing to do now is to set it right. Can we send the child back to the asylum? I suppose they'll take her back, won't they? I suppose so, said Mrs. Spencer thoughtfully, but I don't think it will be necessary to send her back. Mrs. Peter Blewett was up here yesterday, and she was saying to me how much she wished she'd sent by me for a little girl to help her. Mrs. Peter has a large family, you know, and she finds it hard to get help. Anne will be the very girl for her. I call it positively providential. Marilla did not look as if she thought Providence had much to do with the matter. Here was an unexpectedly good chance to get this unwelcome orphan off her hands, and she did not even feel grateful for it. She knew Mrs. Peter Blewett only by sight as a small, shrewish-faced woman without an ounce of superfluous flesh on her bones. But she had heard of her. A terrible worker and driver, Mrs. Peter was said to be, and discharged servant girls told fearsome tales of her temper and stinginess, and her family of pert, quarrelsome children. Marilla felt a qualm of conscience at the thought of handing Anne over to her tender mercies. Well, I'll go in and we'll talk the matter over, she said, and if there isn't Mrs. Peter coming up the lane this blessed minute, exclaimed Mrs. Spencer, bustling her guests through the hall into the parlor, where a deadly chill struck on them as if the air had been strained so long through dark green, closely drawn blinds that it had lost every particle of warmth it had ever possessed. That is real lucky, for we can settle the matter right away. Take the armchair, Miss Cuthbert, and you sit here on the ottoman and don't wriggle. Let me take your hats. Flora Jane, go out and put the kettle on. Good afternoon, Mrs. Blewett. We were just saying how fortunate it was you happened along. Let me introduce you two ladies, Mrs. Blewett, Mrs. Cuthbert. Please excuse me for just a moment. I forgot to tell Flora Jane to take the buns out of the oven. Mrs. Spencer whisked away after pulling up the blinds, and, sitting mutely on the ottoman, with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, stared at Mrs. Blewett as one fascinated. Was she to be given into the keeping of the sharp-faced, sharp-eyed woman? She felt a lump coming up in her throat, and her eyes smarted painfully. She was beginning to be afraid. She couldn't keep the tears back when Mrs. Spencer returned, flushed and beaming, quite capable of taking any and every difficulty, physical, mental, or spiritual, into consideration, and settling it out of hand. It seems there's been a mistake about this little girl, Mrs. Blewett, she said. I was under the impression that Mr. and Miss Cuthbert wanted a little girl to adopt. I was certainly told so, but it seems it was a boy they wanted. So, if you're still of the same mind you were yesterday, I think she'll be just the thing for you. Mrs. Blewett darted her eyes over Anne from head to foot. How old are you, and what's your name? She demanded. Anne Shirley, faltered the shrinking child, not daring to make any stipulations regarding the spelling thereof. And I'm 11 years old. Humph, you don't look as if there were much to you, but you're wiry. I don't know, but the wiry ones are the best ones after all. Well, if I take you, you'll have to be a good girl, you know, good and smart and respectful. I'll expect you to earn your keep, and no mistake about that. Yet I suppose I might as well take her off your hands, Miss Cuthbert. The baby's awful fractious, and I'm clean worn out attending to him. If you like, I can take her home right now. Marilla looked at Anne and softened at the sight of the child's pale face with its look of mute misery, the misery of a helpless little creature who finds itself once more caught in the trap from which it had escaped. Marilla felt an uncomfortable conviction that if she denied the appeal of that look, it would haunt her to her dying day. Moreover, she did not fancy Mrs. Blewett to hand a sensitive, high-strung child over to such a woman. No, she could not take that responsibility of doing that. Well, I don't know, she said slowly. I didn't say that Matthew and I had absolutely decided that we wouldn't keep her. In fact, I may say that Matthew is disposed to keep her. I just came over to find out how the mistake had occurred. I think I'd better take her home again and talk it over with Matthew. I feel that I oughtn't to decide on anything without consulting him. If we make up our mind not to keep her, we'll bring or send her over to you tomorrow night. If we don't, you may know that she is going to stay with us. Will that suit you, Mrs. Blewett? I suppose it'll have to, said Mrs. Blewett ungraciously. During Marilla's speech, a sunrise had been dawning on Anne's face. First, the look of despair faded out. Then came a faint flush of hope. Her eyes grew deep and bright as morning stars. The child was quite transfigured, and a moment later, when Mrs. Spencer and Mrs. Blewett went out in quest of a recipe the latter had come to borrow, she sprang up and flew across the room to Marilla. Oh, Miss Cuthbert, did you really say that perhaps you would let me stay at Green Gables? She said in a breathless whisper, as if speaking aloud might shatter the glorious possibility. Did you really say it? Or did I only imagine that you did? I think you better learn to control that imagination of yours, Anne. If you can't distinguish between what is real and what isn't, said Marilla crossly. Yes, you did hear me say that. Just that, and no more. It isn't decided yet, and perhaps we will conclude to let Mrs. Blewett take you after all. She certainly needs you much more than I do. I'd rather go back to the asylum than go to live with her, said Anne passionately. She looks exactly like a gimlet. Marilla smothered a smile under the conviction that Anne must be reproved for such speech. A little girl like you should be ashamed of talking so about a lady and a stranger, she said severely. Go back and sit down quietly and hold your tongue and behave as a good girl should. I'll try to do and be anything you want me, if you'll only keep me, said Anne, returning meekly to her ottoman. When they arrived back at Green Gables that evening, Matthew met them in the lane. Marilla, from afar, had noted him prowling along it and guessed his motives. She was prepared for the relief she read in his face when he saw that she had at least brought Anne back with her. But she said nothing to him relative to the affair until they were both out in the yard behind the barn milking the cows. Then she briefly told him Anne's history and the result of the interview with Mrs. Spencer. I wouldn't give a dog I liked that Blewett woman, said Matthew, with unusual vim. I don't fancy her style myself, admitted Marilla. But it's that or keeping her ourselves, Matthew. And since you seem to want her, I suppose I'm willing or have to be. I've been thinking over the idea until I've got kind of used to it. It seems a sort of duty. I've never brought up a child, especially a girl, and I dare say I'll make a terrible mess of it. But I'll do my best. So far as I'm concerned, Matthew, she may stay. Matthew's shy face was aglow of delight. Well, now, I reckoned you'd come to see it in that light, Marilla, he said. She's such an interesting little thing. It'd be more to the point if you could say she was a useful little thing, retorted Marilla. But I'll make it my business to see she's trained to be that. And mind, Matthew, you're not to go interfering with my methods. Perhaps an old maid doesn't know much about bringing up a child, but I guess she knows more than an old bachelor. So you just leave me to manage her. When I fail, it'll be time enough to put your oar in. There, Marilla, you can have your own way, said Matthew reassuringly. Only be as good and kind to her as you can be without spoiling her. I kind of think she's one of the sort that you can do anything with if you only get her to love you. Marilla sniffed to express her contempt for Matthew's opinions concerning anything feminine, and walked off to the dairy with the pails. I won't tell her tonight that she can stay, she reflected, as she strained the milk into the creamers. She'd be so excited that she wouldn't sleep a wink. Marilla Cuthbert, you're fairly in for it. Did you ever suppose you'd see the day when you'd be adopting an orphan girl? It's surprising enough, but not so surprising as that Matthew should be at the bottom of it. Him that always seems to have such a mortal dread of little girls. Anyhow, we've decided on the experiment, and goodness only knows what will come of it. She gets to stay. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, it makes me so happy. When I'm reading the parts of Marilla, I know I can't quite get I feel like I can't quite get the right tone in my voice. The way that the actress from the Anne movies, there was I think it was in the 80s. I used to have it on VHS, like literally recorded from TV. But it was like a made for TV special of the Anne of Green Gables books with Megan Follows and a few other actors and actresses, and Marilla. Oh, Marilla. The woman they cast to play Marilla just did such a phenomenal job. I don't think she's alive anymore, but I can picture her and I can just hear her voice when I'm reading those, but I can't seem to quite mimic it. But yeah, isn't that great? So, okay, here we are again. You may recognize I look a little similar to the last podcast because, well, I was gonna do a really, really super long podcast for Juniper GraceTube episode 18, but it just seemed very impractical. So I have decided to split it into 2 episodes, and this is just Juniper GraceTube 19. But I had everything out and ready to go and ready to podcast, so I'm just continuing on. I changed my shawl and and oh, by the way, this is the Stripe Study shawl is it by Vera Falamaki? I think it is. Yes. It is one of my favorite knits. This is knit in Lion brand sock ease. So it was, like literally 2 balls of sock ease. I love it. It's fantastic. It's one of my favorite go-to knits. I'm currently working on my 5th one right now. Because I seem to always have it on the needles. Actually, I can show you since I mentioned it. This is it's knit with Palette from Knit Picks in a navy blue and gray. And I'm right on the bottom band. It's on a tiny, tiny circular, but that's because that just feels comfortable to me. But it becomes, once it's blocked out, this just gorgeous, big, comfy shawl that is honestly my go-to shawl. And I wanted one in navy blue and gray because I'm kind of obsessed with navy blue right now. I love all colors, to be honest. It's really hard. It depends on the moment as to what color I'm in love with. When people ask you, "Oh, what's your favorite color?" I'm like, rainbows. Because I love all colors. There really isn't a color. I honestly don't think there's really a color I don't like. I think I usually shy away from darker, earthy tones because they just aren't as exciting to me as bright, vibrant colors. And I would say like the right navy blue, like the kind I have, it has depth to it. It's not just one level. It may be dark, but it's rich. That's the new, is whenever you say rich. I don't know. Did you ever have that? I even talk with my hands on the phone. Like when I'm talking, I'll be like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no one can see my blah, blah, blah. Oh, well. Okay. So here we are. Juniper GraceTube number 19. We're almost at 20. Oh my gosh. How did this happen? I'm so happy. This is so great. And actually, we're getting close to, we're getting close to the 1st year anniversary of the podcast. That's next month. Crazy. It's October. I never ever say the date because I never get the podcast out when I actually podcast it. But it's October right now. And I just wanted to share something that someone sent to me. It was Meredith, Marrow Shop, on Instagram and Ravelry. She is so sweet. She sent me, I woke up to this morning. It says, "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers and of Green Gables." Oh, and I don't know if it'll show. Oh no. Angle. There you go. It was pumpkins and magicalness. Isn't that so sweet? It definitely made my whole day. I love autumn. I love October. I love that finally the leaves over here out on Vancouver Island, that's where I'm from, Vancouver Island, Canada, West Coast. What? I live in Victoria, and because of the temperate climate, things are different in the fall than they are, say, out on the East Coast or on the mainland. The leaves take a little while to change color, and there's so many evergreens that sometimes it just feels like it just stays green. But now that I've been living on the island for a little while, I'm starting to actually feel the seasons a little bit better. And so now the leaves are changing color, and oh, I just love it. It's so sweet. I go out and we have maple trees out here. Like, I grew up in Edmonton in Alberta, and that is definitely like a prairie province. So there weren't maple trees. We just didn't have them. So it's a real treat to be on the island where there are maples, and I just love the shape of the leaf, and I love the colors that they change. I just think are so iconic for fall. So I constantly in fall time, I'm constantly like picking leaves and stealing them. Like, even when I went to Maine, like in my adventure book, there's, don't report me to like a imports agent or whatever, but these are I don't even remember what kind of leaf that is. Is it an oak leaf? Isn't that pretty? I also stole an East Coast maple leaf, but see, it hadn't really changed color. I really love leaves. I love leaves. It's like I love lamp. I love leaves. Okay. Wow. Focus. All right. So we are in. Onto my cat wants back in. Why does she want back in? No, stay outside. List making with Juniper Grace. So we have a little bit of mail love, MAIL love. No new postcards since the last podcast because, well, it's the same day I'm recording them. La, la, la. But there is some stuff that I ordered through the mail before I went to Maine. So yes, I'm spending way too much money on yarn, guys. This is bad. I'm not going to do it for the next little while. But I ordered this. I follow this amazing person on Instagram called Hey Lady Hey, and she has an Etsy shop. She sells spinning fiber and yarn that she's spun, and she was just doing a little flash sale of some yarn, and I saw it and I was like, oh, its name is It's So Fluffy. It's so fluffy, I'm gonna die. And it's by Hey Lady Hey. So Etsy, she's on Etsy. And it is 100 yards of merino, spindle spun, sock DK weight. And I think I will make mittens out of this, I think. But look how great that is, and look at her tag. And then she tossed in a cute little Gray Day merino and Jacob 50/50. Another little hand spun, which I just love. It's so cute. It's 46 yards, so I'm not entirely sure what I'll get to do with it, but it's so fluffy. Oh, and it's so soft. And it's so sheepy. And I just wanted to say, Hey Lady Hey, you should go check her out. She is fantastic. And her Instagram is really sweet. I love following that. You know me, I'm a sucker for Instagram. I don't know why I said it like that. Then I have officially ordered, although I've already knit with Lollipop Yarns, which I didn't anticipate. I finally ordered my actual first skein from them. It's Yarn Bomb. Oh my gosh. Look at this. This needs to be like knee-high socks. There's how many different colors? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 different colors. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be crazy. It's like off the hook, self-striping awesomeness. Yep. So I am definitely still working on my Canadiana socks. So I don't know when I'll get to this one, but it'll be pretty soon. I love it. It's so squishy. And basically what I did is, because I always miss her updates because I'm always like off in La La Land, I just messaged her and I said, hey, do you think I could just order something from you directly? And she's like, okay, what colors? And I want Downton Abbey, but she's like, well, that one won't come back for a little while, so give me some other ideas, what you'd like. And I said Yarn Bomb, and she's like, okay, well, I'll let you know when that comes out, and then you can get it. And bam, it was while I was in Maine, she sent me a message. She's like, hey, we have yarn bomb again. Do you still want a skein? And I was like, do I want a skein? Yes. So I got one. So that's pretty much the mail love, MAIL love that I've got recently. And then I just am thankful. I think I feel like today I'm just feeling like a very thankful person. I'm thankful it's autumn. We're getting close to Thanksgiving is next weekend for us, not Yanksgiving that you Americans, some of you are Americans, have. We have our Thanksgiving second weekend in October. So this weekend coming up, and I am so lucky that we get to do Thanksgiving dinner with Joel's parents and Thanksgiving dinner with my parents, and yeah, just fun. And I freaking love pumpkin pie, and I really love turkey, and I make really awesome mashed potatoes, so I'm super excited for that. Yeah, so those are my. Oh, and then the last thing I wanted to do, which I haven't done for a little while, is do a Canadian word, because it occurred to me when I was in Maine that maybe you crazy Yanks don't know what a Quonset is. A Quonset hut. I guess officially it's a Quonset hut, but we always know it as a Quonset. So I've got pictures of a Quonset, which I'm sure you've seen before. A lot of farms and other places have them, but that's what they are. They're a Quonset. So Quonset, Quonset. And I was sitting around a table with Mary and Susan and Christy and Kelly, and at the retreat, and I was telling them about one of my favorite old movie theaters in town that is in an old Quonset. And they're like, a what? And I was trying to describe it. I'm like, it has a little curve to the roof, and it's like a barn thing, and they still weren't getting it, so I just pulled out my phone or my iPad, and I was like, Quonset, and I was like, here, this is what it looks like. And they're like, oh, great. But that was a Canadian word, so I guess it's Canadian, I'm guessing, because there were like people representing from different states, and none of them had heard about it. So yeah, there you go, Quonset. What? I love them. I think they're pretty cool. Like, if you get there's cool things you can do inside of the Quonset. Like, look at this. This lady made it into, like, oh man, reflecty face. She made it into a pretty cool place to stay. Like, could you imagine? Could you imagine you can make a yarn shop out of a Quonset hut, or just like a crafting studio? I would hang like a hammock and do like wall-to-wall shelves of beautiful yarn and rocking chair. Like, this person like completely covered in like hardwood. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, so that's your Canadian word for the day. It's been a while. Quonset. Now on to adventures in Juniper Graceland. This weekend. So I went to Maine and Martha's Vineyard and all the way across on the East Coast and all the fun things over there. 2 weeks ago, I came home. I had about a week and a little bit to recover. There was a lot of my husband wanted to hang out with me, which is really wonderful. My family wanted to hang out with me. My friends wanted to hang out with me. I did not get a lot of me time, although I just wanted to kind of curl up and hide for a little while because I was tired and peopled out, and I wanted to just knit, and so I did that a little bit. But then it was time to load her up on Saturday morning. We caught the first ferry, me and my darling mother, Mumsy. She is Moira Paints on Instagram and Ravelry, and we need to bug her and convince her to Instagram more. So if you want to be her friend on either, follow her, Moira, Moira Paints, Paints, on Instagram and Ravelry. But she and I loaded up at 6 o'clock in the morning and went out to the ferry to commence our journey to Knit City. And Knit City is this really, really wonderful thing that happens in Vancouver. I'll hold a little card up. Brought to us by the Knit Social people. It's Fiona and Amanda, and they put on this incredible, wonderful weekend-long thing where there's this beautiful big vendor fair. There's classes done by a lot of people. It's kind of like the Canadian version of Stitches. and wonderful because it's Canadian. I just need a sip of water. And I just realized that a lot of my connections are down in the States and over on the East Coast, and it's time to get more involved in the West Coast. So I'll show you one more time. Knit City. So much fun. And I also was asked by the most amazing Jane Richmond and Shannon Cook to come and work their booth for them at Knit City because, you know, it's busy and it's hard and you need help. And as a designer, you want to be able to schmooze and get to know people and talk to them. And you want, like, the other stuff, you know, like selling things and stuff to go to other people. So, or to be, it's nice to not have to do that. So I was like, hey, man, I can totally do that. I love that. I'm coming to Knit City anyways. So, yeah, let's do it. So, I got an official name tag. Mary and Ray Publications, Grace Cave. Ooh. And I got to wear it, and I got like free admission into the whole thing. We caught the ferry and we made it just in time. Like, we made it with like 15-20 minutes to go before everything opened. And their booth was so cute. And on top of that, they were releasing a brand new pattern book. Woo! It's called Seasonless. It is a mini collection of 3 items. There's a toque, a sweater, and a beautiful shawl. So there's the shawl, and there is the toque and the sweater. And the shawl and the toque were designed by Shannon, and the sweater was designed by Jane. I love this. They were so sneaky. I didn't even really know what all was going on, but let me show you some beautiful, beautiful pictures here. So the toque is called Schwimmen, the shawl is called Lalo, and the sweater is called Palladio. So this is Schwimmen. Oh, seriously. So pretty. This is Lalo, which I seriously cannot wait to knit. And dun-dun-dun. Is it Palladian or Palladian? Palladio. This is I know it as the eyelet rib pullover because that's what I was test knitting in beautiful yellow, and I will show you guys. I have a few little finishing touches. I needed to go back and readjust and make it a little bit longer for me. But when you do test knit, you do it exactly to specifications, and then you adjust later because you got to make sure that to the specifications it works. So they gave me a copy as thanks for helping them work their booth. And I got them to sign it. I love them. Definitely, absolutely going to knit from this really, really soon. So if you want to check it out, they are on Ravelry and Instagram, I believe. Jane Richmond goes by Jane Richmond across the board. And then Shannon, I think, is Very Shannon. And on Instagram, So Very Shannon. So, seriously. The pictures were all taken by Jane's brother and Shannon combined, and love it. So I worked their booth, and it was really fun because that pattern booklet was actually released the morning of the first day at Knit City. So it was really fun because I was like, hey, look at this. This is actually exclusive to Knit City right now. And a lot of people were really excited, and we were really close to the Sweet Fiber booth. So all of the patterns here were actually designed in Madeline Tosh yarn, but Sweet Fiber is like very comparable. If not, I would say I like it better. So here's some Sweet Fiber. That's right, I was right across the way from them. I couldn't help. Sweet Fiber is Melissa from Langley, BC. I believe she's from Langley, BC. Anyways, her mom, is it? I think, runs this amazing local yarn shop called 88 Stitches. You've heard me talk about it before. And I finally got to meet her. We've talked online like a ton of times. But this is the Moss colorway. It's their super sweet sock, 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon, 415 yards, 115 grams in the Moss colorway. Oh, that, and then I also got same yarn, but the spiced pumpkin colorway. So I was thinking I could do that shawl. I was thinking green with a spiced pumpkin border, because then half the skein is left over to make fingerless mittens or something. Couldn't help myself with that one. It was really fun. And one of the most fun things is that I put out on Instagram that I was going to be at Jane and Shannon's booth, and I said, hey, if you want to come and say hello to me, please come and say hello to me. And some really wonderful people did. I think some people might have been nervous, maybe, or didn't realize I was there. So I didn't meet as many people as I was hoping, but I did meet quite a few. So I have to do a special shout out to the people that came the furthest from Alberta, the land of my birthplace. Sounded weird. Jen, and Laura, and Laura's sister Carly. Oh my gosh, it was so exciting to see you guys. And you had Jen had a little bird that she was getting people to take pictures with, and then Laura had this little lamb, and it was just magical. It was so cool to see them, and it was so cool because it was like real live junipers that were like excited to come see me, and I was so excited to see them, and I wanted to like not be working so I could just go hang out with them, but they had a bunch of classes, so it was totally cool. But they flew out from Alberta to come and go to Knit City, which I think is so cool. Like, so freaking cool. So it was really good to see you guys. And when they left on the second day, I didn't get a chance to see them because I was taking a class by Stephanie Pearl McPhee, the yarn harlot, and they weren't allowed to crash to say goodbye to me, which is fair, because that'd be a little awkward, like, excuse me, Stephanie, I'm just gonna say goodbye to my friends here. So they Instagram, they're like, they wouldn't let us come in to say goodbye, but we're goodbye. Oh, so cute. It was so good to see them. I also met Sasha, Naughty by Knitcher, like nature, but with knitting in it. She was really lovely. I love meeting her. Doreen came and gave me a hug. Yay. Who else? And then in my class with the Yarn Harlot, someone else came and introduced themselves to me, but my brain was like, oh my gosh, I just met the Yarn Harlot. So I can't remember your name, but you're so cute, and she has blonde hair, and she's really, really sweet. And she's like, oh, is that Juniper Grace? And I was like, what? I just got recognized? Oh, and I met Mud Punch. Your real name is escaping me again. That's the hard part. We have like different identities, right? Like we have our Instagram thing, and then we have like our online moniker, and then our real life name, and so it's like really tough to keep that straight sometimes. I'll be like, oh hey, nice to meet you, and then they'll be like, yeah, I'm this and this on Instagram, and I'm like, I totally know who you are. Isn't that funny? We should all have those pins that say, like, I've got my Ravelry pin that's like, I'm Juniper Grace on Ravelry. But, like, it should also say, and Instagram, and, you know, everywhere. So the first day was really awesome. It was a bit of torture working only because I just wanted to be able to go see all the booths. We were really close to, I was right across from Caitlin French of We Will Tell You All Our Secrets, and her and her husband built this adorable little like witch hut thing. It was like this random wooden little hut that they actually got to sit in the whole time they were there. Genius. Love that. On the other side of the curtain from us was Vegan Yarns. So Heidi with Vegan Yarns, she came over and saw us. Her husband brought his guitar. One of my favorite things is all the husband involvement. Like for a lot of the yarn companies, they come and they work the booths, and like it's like the wife and her hubby, and same with like Rain City Knits, Krista, and I think it's her husband. Yeah, and oh, they're so cute, and they wear the t-shirts. Or like Heidi's husband came and played guitar. Like I love them. I love that community, you know, that feeling of like this. Same with Catherine from Caterpillar Green Yarns. Her husband was there too. He was like working the till, and oh my gosh, Caterpillar Greens like sold out, no time flat. I cast on, they have self-striping shawl yarn. I cast on a boneyard shawl in the self-striping shawl yarn that West Knits. Stephen West actually commented on it on Instagram. See, I'm such a fangirl. I'm like, I can't believe it. I got so excited. I was like, Mom! But then my mom really wanted to do her own shawl because she never does selfish knitting. And by the time we got to their booth, they had sold out of most of the colors, and the only colors left didn't really suit my mom. So she bought socks in the concrete and tulip colorway sock yarn. But she really wanted the shawl yarn. So I traded her, and I gave her what I had already started on the shawl, and so she can she can finish it and doesn't have to start it. And she's so cute. It made me really happy. So it made me really happy. And now I have an excuse to buy a different skein of self-striping shawl yarn. Speaking of Caterpillar Green, so they had these adorable little tattoos, knit pearl. They're fake tattoos, and I swiped a couple for you guys. And so I have a little, I have a new giveaway. We did the stickers last time. This time we're gonna do a little tattoo and a pin from Sweet Georgia. All you knit is love. Knit pearl and all you knit is love. And I just want to hear. I want to see one of your most favorite knit objects that you've made recently or years ago or working on, but just show me a picture or at least tell me about it, but I'd love to see a picture. And if you, it doesn't cost anything to share a picture that you've already uploaded for like a pattern, like a project page. But yeah, share with me and then I will pick 2 winners to get Knit Pearl Tattoo and All You Knit Is Love button from Sweet Georgia. Okay? I'll have that in the Ravelry group. So that was amazing. And day 2 was my class with the Yarn Harlot. And it was all about basically how to avoid mistakes in knitting, what you've been doing wrong all these years. And it was a lot of the basics that, I mean, I was familiar with them, with a lot of what she said, but at the same time, it was really awesome to hear from her specifically, like, this is what she does when she's picking a pattern. This is how she picks the yarn for the pattern. This is how she substitutes yarn, because half the time you can't really get the same yarn that the pattern calls for. And it was awesome. I had my little notebook with me and I was scribbling madly. She started off with myths about knitting, which I thought was really interesting. I don't want to tell everything that she talked about, but one thing I found really interesting is how she said, a lot of people think knitting is really old, but it's actually not that old. And one thing she said was, the woman who invented the SSK is still alive. So it is so new along the lines of handicrafts. It's still so evolving and changing, and there's not a lot of standardization. Really interesting. She called it, okay, so now it's time to knit a thing. So how do we do it? So she talked about how to avoid mistakes with yarn. She talked about how to assess the angle of the twist, different things to look at on the label. One of my favorite things, and I'm not sure if you've heard this before, but she says pilling is bad. She's like, I know a lot of people say they don't mind about pilling, they don't care, but pilling is your sweater leaving in slow motion. It's so true. Oh my gosh, I died. I laughed so hard. At one point, they like, it was really funny because where our classrooms were, they weren't like actual rooms. They were in this big open section that was like divided by curtains, and so it was a bit noisy and kind of hard to hear. That was my only downside to the classroom. Like, I was like this a lot of the time because I didn't want to miss what she was saying, but it was just such a noisy environment. Like, we were all in the big one open area, so like the market was just over there, and then the classrooms were like right here. So they came over the loudspeaker to announce that someone was doing a demonstration of speed knitting at the Sweet Georgia booth. But it was super loud, totally like Stephanie could not continue while that announcement was being made. And then she said to me, she's like, okay, well, if you want to go, that's fine. And she said, and where's the quote? I actually wrote it down because I thought it was just so funny. She said, I just finished parenting 3 teenage girls. I can no longer be hurt. She's so funny, but so knowledgeable. Like, I'm serious. Like, I filled up probably a third of this little notebook with things that I learned from her. Like, I don't know, seams, they add stability. So like, if you're knitting a sweater and it's in different pieces and you have to seam it together and you're like, why couldn't I just knit that in the round? Seams add stability. So if you before you get rid of that and you change it so that you can knit it in the round or all in one piece, think about why that seam is there. Genius, right? She also is a very strong advocate for having really nice tools, and she told the joke about how weavers make fun of spinners because spinners will weavers will make fun of knitters because knitters will spend a ton of money on yarn, but they won't spend any money on needles, versus weavers, they'll spend tons of money on their tools, but they'll buy like $2 cones of who knows what to weave with. So it's really, really true. Like, if we're knitting and we're spending all this time on these garments and spending all this money on beautiful sock yarn, beautiful things like that, we deserve / should treat ourselves to something like nice tools that actually make the process of knitting more pleasant. I love that. Oh my gosh, it's already an hour. Wow, crazy. Okay, so I've shown you my sweet fiber, but now it's time to show you a few other things. So every year at Knit City, they come out with a new colorway that they sell yarn of, and this year they had fiber. I don't know if they had fiber last year. They probably did, but this year it's Ancient Arts fiber in the Knit City colorway. This was this year's colorway. So I grabbed some fiber to do my Spinzilla Team Vegan Yarn. Woo! My Spinzilla. So I'm going to spin this probably tonight, actually. I picked that up. I also picked up a skein of the Knit City colorway from last year because it was on my brain. I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I was mad that I didn't buy the yarn from last year because I hemmed and hawed and never did it. So this is from last year. It's Cataclue Fiber Studio, Organic Merino DK Light Worsted, 100% certified organic merino, 246 yards, and it's the Knit City colorway from last year, which I love. Let me hold up the tag. It's from cataclue.com. How cool. They're on Salt Spring Island. Actually, every time I go to Salt Spring Island, I drive past and I can see them up on the little hill just outside of Ganges. And so I bought the skein because I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And I only got one. I should have gotten two, but I think I'll be happy with what I make from just one. And I bought the Knit City bag because, you got to get a little bag. So knitsocial.ca, this was this year's bag. I love it, the little project bag. But they sold out really fast this year. Like, I'm really glad that I got the stuff while I could because, oh my gosh, they were sold out in like that. Which is crazy because they had a bunch of leftover colors from last year. They still have leftover colors from last year. So I guess the gray with the brown, orange and stuff is not a huge thing, but I love it. So day 2, I did the class, and then I did a little bit of shopping, and then I kind of came in, I helped Jane and Shannon so that they could actually have lunch. I helped them the second day for a little while, and then went back to shopping. My aunt came to visit, Auntie Meryl. Hi, Auntie Meryl. And we went shopping because it's really hard. I was like, oh, it's good that I'm working the booth, then I won't go shopping. But then you're watching everyone with their amazing things that they buy and seeing other vendors kind of pop around. And I'm like, oh, I want to buy things. I have a problem. So I went around and one of the shops, one of the booths was an actual yarn shop, 3 bags full from Vancouver. And they were carrying Jameson's, Shetland, Spindrift, and my friend Lori times 5 just went on a Shetland adventure. So I bought the yarn because I wanted to get my hands on some Shetland yarn. I've just been watching her, and I thought I'd do a Kate Davies pattern. Neepheed by Kate Davies. It's a beret with a beautiful. At Maine, I learned how to color work without fear. So isn't that just gorgeous? Neepheed by Kate Davies. So I will link to that in the show notes, but I'm going to do that with these beautiful little balls of Shetland wool. So excited. Then I found a couple other things. Let's see. There's this one shop called Tipsy Sheep Yarn. Sock tails. So everything is inspired by a cocktail, and this is the White Russian colorway. It just made me think of the dude, I just loved it. So it's 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, 463 yards, so like really good yardage. Yeah, so I got that, and they also had little pins that they were giving away. So there's the little Tipsy Sheep. See, it's a sheep with a cocktail. Isn't that adorable? Oh, I love it. And then there's this woman from Ontario who came all the way from Ontario, like holy cannoli, Farmable Fibers, and she was selling hemp and silk. And so I found 100% raw hemp from Romania, 144 yards. I think I'll do dishcloths with it. I just thought it was so cute. So I scored that, and it was a really great price. So it wasn't, it wasn't too painful. Oh, and so then with the podcast, we've been having some swaps going on. We had the Philip Project Bag swap, as well as the Fun Friend Mitten swap, where you have a partner, you pick mittens, you knit them, and then you swap the right one. So it's like a mismatched pair of mittens in the end, but it's really fun. So my swap partner for Fill a Project Bag is Lena from A Wee Bit Knitty. Now she is from Norway, and we did a little questionnaire and filled out like what our favorite colors were. And I thought I have to get her some Canadian yarn, a local Canadian yarn. So Lena, I'm going to show you something, and if you haven't got it yet or you don't want to see the surprise, just turn away. Just don't look for a second, okay? Everyone else, I just want to show you because it's too nice not to show. It is from Sweet Georgia. And it's this beautiful yellow. It's the Tough Love sock yarn, which is like my favorite one of their yarns. And it's the lemon curd colorway. It's really hard to send this away, but it was totally worth it. Then one of my mitten swap partners, we decided we're going to just do a swap anyways. So Maeve, otherwise known as Rar Pounce. Look away if you don't want to see this, but you probably will have this in the mail by now, I think. I asked her if she wanted anything from Knit City, and she said, I want something green from Rain City Knits. Oh, look at this. Isn't that gorgeous? So this is 100 grams, 463 yards, 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and it is their sock weight yarn. I freaking love it. And Krista from Rain City Knits is so cute. They just went through rebranding. And then when I was in their booth, I went back because I love them and they're so funny. I met them at Vibrations. I couldn't help but pick up 2 more skeins of their sock yarn because she was wearing this shawl. And it's called They Don't Love You Like I Love You Shawlette by Rena Varsakis from the Red Fox and Gown. Yeah, Red Fox and Gown. Now, that is Krista's sister. So they were sharing a booth, and she has the cutest little, here's the Red Fox and Gown business card. Cutest little booth, and she was wearing, this is her little moo card. Oh my gosh, I die. Krista was wearing the shawl, and I just couldn't help myself. So I picked up the yarn for that, and I am so excited to knit that. And I also, one last thing is I found this adorable little shop called Twig Prints, and she was doing little bags and bins and little satchels, and I got this adorable little lavender satchel. Like, here, let me hold it really, really close, and you smell the screen and pretend that you can smell. Use your Anne of Green Gables imagination and smell the lavender. Oh my gosh, so amazing. So those were a lot of the things, but if you can see over my shoulder, I do have some fiber goodness. Over here is some more yarn from Maine, but I guess I'll share that later. I was going to do a mini Maine moment, but we're running out of time. Okay, so let me tell you about these little guys over here, and then I think it is super time to stop talking. Okay, so then very close to our booth was Dyed in the Wool from Spin Cycle Yarns. Look, it's a pirate sheep with knitting needles. I found this yarn, and it's called Robin's Egg, the colorway. Oh, that was a big indulgent. It was a little more pricey than I would normally pay for such a skein, but look how beautiful that is. Basically, what they do is they dye it before they spin it, unlike a lot of indie dyers that dye after it's spun. Then they were also selling wool or mill ends of like wool that didn't get used. I think this is from the Robin's Egg colorway, which is perfectly good fiber to spin. It just didn't make the cut into the skeins. So I bought 2 bags for Spinzilla. I know this won't make much, but how cute is that? Like, what if I could do like a tiny mini skein and knit a hexie puff? Oh, and I got the stuff from this color from this year, and then I also went to one booth called Calliope's Fibers. I think I have the business card here somewhere. La la la. Oh no. Okay, maybe I don't. But this is from. Oh, here. This is the business card right here. So Calliope's fiber. Oh, so beautiful. This is the bat. This bat contains 46% merino, 38% Manx, 16% soy silk. Isn't that gorgeous? They had a deal to buy more than this, but I was just like, I can't. So it's only 2.3 ounces, which won't spin up a ton, but again, so beautiful. So that's that. And then because I'm on Team Vegan Yarn, I had to get some vegan fiber. Now this is, I believe it's called vegan cashmere nylon. Oh, guys, it's so soft. If you could just feel what I feel right now. I don't know if I want to spin it. I think I just want to lay in it for a little while. It is so soft. Oh, Heidi. And it's such a beautiful, cheerful blue color with like tiny little hints of like a little bit of green. It's amazing. So, here you go, vegan yarns. And she does this adorable like little thank you. Thank you for supporting vegan yarns. So we're going to be doing a knit along with her. She has a mystery knit along in November, and we're going to do that with, trust me, you're going to love it. Yeah, so those were my, oh, and then there's this last one that I actually bought when I was back in Victoria, but they were at Knit City, so Humming Bee Farm. I got a bat of, I believe this is Pullworth, 2 ounces. I just love the color. Isn't that cute? I'm starting to realize that 2 ounces doesn't spin up as much as I had hoped, but oh well, I can get over it. Oh, and I wanted to show that I'm figuring out, because I'm trying to like test myself on new things. I tried Navajo plying for the first time because I really want to be able to dye those or spin those beautiful like gradient dyed, bats and not lose the color to barber striping or whatever, barber pulling. So this is my first ever Navajo ply. I don't know if it'll show much detail. See? Isn't that pretty? It's just like a pink and slightly purpley. It's not as scary as I thought it would be. I mean, it's way over twisted, but whatever. That's fine. It'll be more stable. And for a first try, that's really not bad. And so it's a little mini skein, and I freaking love it, and it's so sweet, and fun. Okay, all right. So we have blethered on for a little while. It's time to let you guys go. But I'm so glad that you came by to see me, and I'm sure that you got an awful lot of knitting done. I'm also very, very sure that you have finished your delicious beverage by now. You're probably ready to get back to the real world. So, without further ado, oh wait, did I remind you guys of the coupon code from Port Fibers. We still have our coupon code until October 22nd. Port Fibers, the lovely Casey, has given us 15% off Port Fibers, just the fiber, not the tools, but the fiber on her Etsy shop until October 22nd. I highly recommend going and checking out her stuff. Can't say it enough. Make sure, and then tell her that I sent you, because she needs to know how awesome she is. Yeah. Go get some beautiful fiber. Fiber like this, goldfish memory. You will not regret it. Trust me. Trust me. Okay, all right, fine. Stop talking, Grace. It is safe for you to return to your life as normal. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'll see you next time. I miss you already. I miss you. Why are you gone? Goodbye.